alumni conference that's sponsored by Fielding Graduate University. We have over 300 people going to attend various sessions throughout the week. And I'm really pleased that in this session alone, we have many of you will be here not only for this one, but for other topics as we go through the program this week. And I just want to call out and thank Hillary Molina, who, as our Director of Alumni Relations, has put all of this together for everyone. Of all of the problems emerging in the 21st century, food insecurity and lack of access to clean water are top of the list. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to have a session like this today, not only to honor the work of our great alum and colleague, Dr. George Fedha, but also to really dig more into these important issues. They're so fundamental to human survival and also to thrivability, right, if you will. And these are vexing and complicated problems. So root causes are many. The uneven distribution and consumption of resources, for instance, climate change, violent conflict, all of these have a bearing on whether people experience personal safety, economic security, food in our bellies, and water to drink. And at Fielding, we believe in the power of knowledge to promote just systems. And we know that that's idealistic, right? It starts in an idealistic notion that education itself can open up new ways of knowing that individuals can take on and then build from that awareness and bring to their work, to their practice. So the scholarly enterprise that we believe in and we're committed to is both incremental. It's that long view of time and of history that over time we build an accumulation of knowledge that can be used for good in the world, but it's also impactful. Like, what can we do now and for the greater good? And that is the essence of what it means to be a scholar practitioner. I know Dr. Fedha, like many Fielding students, I remember when he came to Fielding initially with a deep vision for his work, and he dug into the existing literature and knowledge, and he created a powerful tool for learning. I read his dissertation. He studied fellow colleagues, other aid workers, to find out how did they experience their own very difficult work amidst chaos and violence and human suffering. How did that work come together for them? And what he learned was that aid workers are a highly adaptive and self-organized group of people who frequently confronted new situations by introducing new kinds of behavior in response. So using the theory of complex adaptive systems, he revealed how we as human beings adapt to uncertainty. And certainly these are skills for our times. And that's the context for our time together today. And I look forward to learning more about this very important work with Dr. Fedha and his excellent colleagues. I'm going to now, my role is to introduce Dr. Fred Steier, who will be moderating the session. Dr. Steier has been a professor in the School of Leadership Studies at Fielding Graduate University for many years. His life's work has focused on whole systems design and systemic approaches to the understanding of and transformation of social systems of diverse kinds, with special attention to issues around learning, also communication, and quality of life. And in recognition of this work, in 2019, he had the honor of receiving the Norbert Wiener Award for Lifetime Achievement from the American Society for Cybernetics. And he also has been a scientist in resident at the Museum of Science and Industry in Tampa. He is in essence of and embodies that scholar practitioner mindset. He was also named recently a King Olav V Fellow by the American Scandinavian Foundation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steier for our program. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers, and welcome everyone to this initial session. It's quite an honor to be hosting it, although my role as host will be much more of a facilitator of the conversation, so I'll be in the background for most of this. First, I wanted to thank Hillary Molina, specifically for making all of the complex arrangements for setting this up. And in addition, Karen Bogart and Katrina Rogers for creating the space for having this session. It's quite an honor to be hosting this session in so many ways. I'm coming to you right now from Tampa, Florida. Ordinarily, if it weren't for the pandemic, I would be coming to you from Oslo, Norway. So, which makes this session particularly meaningful because Oslo is also the home for where the Nobel Peace Prize is awarded. And one of the background ideas behind this session is to honor the work of the World Food Program with its recent attainment of the Nobel Peace Prize. And I wanted to just read something to introduce this session for the words that were offered in the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to the World Food Program. The Peace Prize Committee said, for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contributions to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. And they go on to say that when in 2018, Yemen was facing famine, a massive scale-up of World Food Program operations in war-torn Yemen was able to bring the country back from the brink. Today, however, millions of people in parts of Yemen and other conflict-affected countries, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Nigeria, South Sudan, are again at risk of dying of hunger if food assistance does not reach them. So it was no small achievement, a huge achievement for the World Food Program to be so recognized. And I congratulate all of our participants and all members of the World Food Program in receiving this. One minor thing in terms of how we'll be doing this session. One of the things, actually there are three main ideas behind the World Food Program that are about its mission. One is humility, another is integrity, and another is collaboration. And to that, I would also add, just from our meetings, the ideas of respect and also dignity. And in keeping with that, what I'd like to do is to do something a little bit different in this session, which is that we won't be using title, last name. That we'll be using simply first name. So I will be Fred for the remainder of the session, which is who I am. And I would also then like to introduce our three panelists from the World Food Program. And they will introduce themselves a little bit later on, but I'll do this all at once. Our main contact for this is, as Katrina had mentioned, George Fedha. And I actually met George, gosh, it must have been about 15 years ago, at a meeting for the European cluster of fielding in Sant Cugat, Spain. And I have to say that George's presence of the meeting was an absolute delight. His smile, his voice completely transformed the meeting, which was about ideas of developing collaboration. George also helped to arrange a meeting for planning for the future between fielding and the World Food Program in Rome. And I think it was probably, my memory is going, but it was about 10 years ago. And it's in the spirit of that meeting in Rome that we had that we would like to have this session not only as about the World Food Program, but also about thinking of what might we as fielding faculty, fielding students, fielding alum do to be advocates for the World Food Program, to offer ways of helping the World Food Program. So keep that in mind in terms of how we listen and participate in this session. The three participants are from the World Food Program. First, George Fedha. And George has been a leader with the World Food Program for over a decade. This past August, he was appointed to the head of mission in Namibia. And in this role, George is in charge of that program and operations of the World Food Program in the country of Namibia. He works very closely with various government departments, including the Prime Minister's office. Offices of Agriculture, Rural and Urban Development, and also Education, National Planning, the National Planning Commission, Gender Equality to support systems and capacity to address hunger, as well as to support Namibia's smallholder farmers, especially women and youth, in promoting increased local food production. You can see the variety of roles that each of the members of the World Food Program actually take on in their work in different countries. This effort, combined with others, will help in working towards the World Food Program's overall goal of zero hunger by 2030. Dr. Fedha earned his PhD in Human and Organizational Systems from fielding, and as Katrina, Dr. Rogers mentioned, his dissertation focused on an aspect of his work with the World Food Program. How aid workers adapt to complexity and uncertainty in the front line of war against hunger in 2010. And I must add, as a personal note, I was honored to be on George's committee, and it was a wonderful situation of learning with the student or learning from the student. We also have Stella Mavenjina, and Stella is the head of the Mingkaman field office in the World Food Programme's South Sudan operation, certainly an area where there has been much conflict recently, actually for quite some time. Stella previously worked for World Food Programme Uganda, first as head of the Gulu field office and then as head of the Yumbe field office. Prior to joining the World Food Programme, Stella worked as a nutrition officer with the World Vision in the Kitgum district of northern Uganda and as a research assistant in the Center for Basic Research in Kampala in Uganda. Mary Stella holds a bachelor's degree in food science and technology and a master's degree in public health. And again, you're getting a sense of the variety of backgrounds that people bring to their work with WFP and the importance of having that variety. We also are pleased to have Petroc Wilton. Petroc is the head of communication for WFP Somalia, where much of his work deals with government and external communications in an increasingly complex political context. He was previously a communications officer with WFP Uganda, based in the deep field in the north of the country. There he worked both with George and Stella, so Petroc, George, and Stella have a history of collaboration, which is wonderful to listen to, and they'll share some stories about that. With a particular focus on direct engagement with the 700,000 plus Congolese and South Sudanese refugees living in the area. Before joining WFP and the United Nations, Petroc worked as an award-winning business journalist, an editorial director in Australia, a corporate accountant in Hong Kong, and a language teacher in Japan. We actually have people on this call from Japan, Petroc. So if you want to offer greetings to them in Japanese, that's also okay. So I'm going to turn this over to George to maybe open up this session, even though we've opened it up already, maybe offering a little bit of the history and background of the World Food Programme. One word in terms of how the process is going to work. For many of you who are used to doing meetings in Zoom, you're used to the chat and sometimes the chat taking over the actual meeting. That's not there this time. This is a different platform. If you have questions for the participants, what we would ask you to do is to put them, you'll see a Q&A box, put them in there, and we will make selections for them, and we'll give you a cue as to when we would like questions to be coming in. One word about the questions, again, because this is an academic institution that values scholar practitioner, please keep the questions short. So if you want a guideline for word count for questions, probably is okay if your questions are shorter than the answers that you would like to receive. Okay, George, let me turn this over to you. And again, welcome and thanks for joining us. Maybe, with your questions, also put in your name and where you are, as that will also help us. And George is actually joining us from Windhoek in Namibia. George?
Thanks, Fred, and thanks again, Katrina and team, again, Hillary for the wonderful work putting this together, Brian and Chair Karen for pulling us all together. Wonderful to have this space and colleagues who are listening in and who will be participating in this call. I'm so happy to be reconnected with my colleagues, Stella, who is currently in South Sudan, Petroc, whose feet is itching to jump into Somalia. And it's amazing to have this conversation. I won't really go through kind of a lecture mode, but just to shortly just appreciate that Fielding also recognizes WFP's abilities and capability to have won the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that is still something that means a lot to us individually. The work we do, all over the world, being the largest food aid agency of the United Nations, working in, especially during COVID time, covered almost a billion people that were assisted by WFP. And so the historical synopsis of WFP, starting with a humanitarian food emergency agency and transitioning that into, an agency that also supports, smallholder farmers to enable them produce more food. And that's exactly what we are doing in Namibia. Stella in South Sudan is working also on that portion of her work. Petroc is doing a lot of advocacy work to make sure that as fragile as Somalia is, it's able to have some resilience building programs. So it's amazing to see this complex adaptive system in terms of the way the whole system is rolling, that fragility is not an excuse for people not to have food anymore. And so as you see from the pictures rolling back, this is places where WFP work. And our colleagues within the organization, we keep on transiting from one country to another, where we embrace, the virtues of humanity, where we really believe in what we do. We embrace the values of being inclusive, because we know everybody matters, everybody's participation is crucial. We have to ensure that we carry our work out with dignity. But of all the things is basically that collaboration and community engagement, because we don't get solutions from our, my class with my few sessions with Fred on systems thinking, sometimes were never really meaningful until you actually try to apply them in practice. So WFP has offered space for me to grow through the practice country after country, to understand that learning never ends in our profession and many other professions. And leading and leadership is a growing, I should say, phenomena. You can never be a leader in a static manner. So I think it's exciting to have this conversation, to share experiences of our colleagues, the alumni, who themselves, I'm sure, have complex lives every day in different professions and different endeavors. Yeah, so Fred, I think I will stop there and not bore everyone, and open up the space for everyone to continue. Over to you, Fred.
Thanks, George. And I wonder, let's see if we, Stella, I wonder if you might add a little bit to the history that George has laid out from your own background, and maybe introduce yourself to us.
Stella, we're on mute.
Yeah.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, you're coming through very well, Stella. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, I also want to thank Fielding University for giving us this opportunity to share our experience. I'm Mary Stella Mavenjina, my name's. I actually joined the World Food Program as a monitoring assistant, and I have had the opportunity to transition up to this level of heading in another country. So I would like to share a bit on a bit of our history and how we do our work and why it's really important, linked to the Nobel. In the beginning, the World Food Program was only operating in the areas where we have emergencies, which is what we are doing now. Over 90% of the operations have a conflict or disaster-related dimension. And for most of my time in the World Food Program and humanitarian space, I have worked in areas where we have conflict and disaster. And when we talk about conflict, to unpack people who were once leading normal lives are displaced from their places of residence, are displaced from their homes, either within a country or out of a country. And we have had to always provide assistance to the people we serve. So if I look at operations like Northern Uganda, where I had the privilege to work, in a day or a few days, 2 million people were displaced and were living in camps that were insecure. This situation is not just Northern Uganda. Even now, when we look at operations like South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, most of our conflict locations, we have people who are leading normal lives, displaced and don't have access to food. The food is not available on the market, and the World Food Programme and humanitarian workers need to come and respond. When we talk about respond, it might sound very easy, but there are locations that in the normal circumstance, people are not able to reach, or we've had to move with military escorts, accompanied, escorted to be able to reach the people we serve. And sometimes you're not even sure you'll come back the following day. But that is where the humility lens of the World Food Programme comes in, of the staff. And at the same time, you have to have the passion to be able to ensure we have people with zero hunger in the world. So with this conflict dimension, in the spirit of global leading and learning, in the past, the World Food Programme for a long time was responding with in-kind food assistance to the people we serve. But in the spirit of leading and learning, depending on the different circumstances, there are operations where when people are displaced, the food is available in the market, but they don't have the resource. So in the spirit of global leading and learning, the World Food Programme and other humanitarian workers have been able to modify their assistance from providing in-kind food to actually offering them cash or vouchers that enables the people we serve meet their need, either through buying in the local market with cash or using the voucher program to redeem and get the food. In operations like South Sudan, where I'm working right now in my field office, we use the voucher program, and the vouchers are used to redeem the cash. In Uganda, where me, George, and Petroc worked, people received physical cash and not vouchers, and were able to support the local markets by injecting the cash and providing food. So in the spirit of global leading and learning, when you look way behind the 90s, from inception, the 1960s, we were using food, but we've been able to modify and either use cash or vouchers. So we not only support the community that is directly affected, but even the host community that is supporting, that is giving these people a place of safe haven or abode. So World Food Programme has to modify and is continuing to modify and make the programs smarter and make people's lives better. Yeah, if I'm to elaborate again further, when I say World Food Programme is able to reach where nobody can reach, even sometimes when we discuss with the people we serve, because they've gone through so much, even when they are not cooperative, still the World Food Programme has to rise above the challenge and find a way to meet and provide the food needs of the people we serve on a regular basis or a monthly basis. So as we provide this assistance, the organization looks forward, looks ahead, and is always geared towards preparing the people to transition and stand on their own. So we have programs where we provide food to help them meet their immediate needs, but also get self-reliant. I think I'll stop here for now, and then my colleague can build on the reliance wheel. If I elaborate a little in my personal experience, for programs we've worked in, we've helped them establish woodlots, opened up community access roads from camps where they've been displaced, just to make sure the community is ready to stand on their own once we exit. So even South Sudan, that is still in the emergency mode, as we support to meet the immediate needs, we're still working and looking forward towards having the community be self-reliant. And we lead and learn from the past emergencies to help the other operations get better. So I think I'll stop here for now.
Thanks so much, Stella. And one of the things that, well, there are a couple of points that I'd like to build on throughout the session. I mean, one is the recognition of operating in a field of danger, right? That, you know, this is not something that you're doing from a hotel room. Another is the challenges of recognizing when you are called on for needs directly related to emergencies, and when you have the opportunity to really make aid in terms of development of ways of dealing with those emergencies, but more long-term. What I'd like to do now is to invite Petroc Wilton to offer a little bit of what it is that he does and the importance of a communications officer in the World Food Programme. Petroc?
Thanks, Fred. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. So,
fantastic.
I can, I'm assuming everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Fielding for the opportunity to speak here today. It's a great honour to be involved in this, what sounds like a first of its kind event. So many thanks there. I am, of course, delighted to have the chance to appear with George and with Stella because, among other things, both of them are amongst the reasons I'm with WFP and the UN at all. As Fred noted in the brief intro, I was working as a journalist in the private sector in Australia, and I'd long had an interest in becoming involved with the work of the United Nations, and I managed to come to northern Uganda as a volunteer. And I remember very strongly being actually at George's place for a post-event debriefing and drinking session with George and the team, and Stella, you know, really encouraging me, you know, you should make the most of this, you should try and stay with WFP. And then the week after that, I told George how much I'd enjoyed my volunteer stint and asked him what advice he had for continuing a career in the field, and he sort of went, oh, I can offer you a job if you like. So that was much easier than I thought. So thank you, George. Thank you, Stella. Communications is an interesting beast in WFP because what the job requires really changes based on context. In terms of, call it the external communications, it's a fascinating time to be involved because, as I think George and Stella have made really clear, it's a time in which WFP is really transitioning. The organization will turn 60, check my maths, yeah, it will turn 60 this year since it was originally founded. And for much of its history, WFP has really been known as a humanitarian operation and really a logistics specialist, moving initially large amounts of in-kind foodstuff, you know, big bags of rice and grains, to people who were starving, people in crisis areas, people in conflict areas, people who really needed it. Stella, I think, has already mapped out the way that these days we're doing more of our assistance in a cash-based way. It's still to buy food, but it now also actually has advantages for the local markets, helps the local economies rather than just bringing in food from overseas and giving it out. And as George, I think, has made clear as well, we are increasingly building on this humanitarian foundation into the development space. I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with the idea that if you give a man a fish, he's fed for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he's fed for life. And that's really kind of, I think, embodies where WFP finds itself now. More and more, we are working on building the livelihoods of the people we serve, imparting skills, helping to build up local markets, helping to build up food systems so that zero hunger is sustainable, because giving out food or cash for food on a monthly basis always has a half-life. The donor appetite for funding these things is not infinite, as I guess is clear. And so this sustainable move towards zero hunger is a critical thing, and communicating that to the public, to news agencies, especially to our donor countries, it is a challenge because a lot of them are more used to WFP's humanitarian mandate, and this development edition, takes a bit of communicating. The other important role, I would say, of communications in the WFP context is stakeholder communications, I guess, at a broad brush, but this can be incredibly different depending on where you're working. In northern Uganda with George and Stella, my real priority when I first arrived was boosting our communications with the people we served, talking to them, listening to them, especially on the resilience piece. That is so incredibly important because, a UN agency, any agency, comes essentially from outside in the first instance, will hire local staff as well as international staff. But of course, if you don't listen to the people you are serving, how can you know what livelihoods activities might be feasible? How can you know where they see themselves growing? And so a big part of my work in Uganda to begin with was just that, was working out how WFP as an organization could speak more effectively to and listen more effectively to the people we served. Also in Uganda, communication with local government structures was incredibly important, and this was something that George really pushed very hard during his time as the head of the area office that Stella and I both worked in. It's kind of foolhardy to come in as an international organization and think that you can create policy or you can create programs if you are not taking account of and working with existing structures and programs at the local level. Some of the work has already been done. A local administration will often have a much clearer idea of the particular wants, of the particular kind of cultural fit, of so many other factors. For WFP and the UN to be really efficient, working with that local level of administration is critically important. And that means, yes, humility, yes, speaking, yes, listening. You can't just march in and go, oh, with the United Nations, here's what we're going to do. No. It's so important to kind of listen with humility, suggest with humility, and work together with humility, because it's those local leadership structures that will be key to sustainable zero hunger. Now in Somalia, I'm doing more work, I think, with national policy, but it's the same thing. It's getting involved with what is currently a very complicated political environment, with a relatively fledgling government after years of really sort of little governance. Every ministry has its own priorities. The national government has its own priorities. It's so critically important to understand that, to listen carefully, and to speak in a very nuanced and very humble way to suggest how WFP might work to support the government to integrate with the policies of government at that national level as well as the local. Fred, I think I've probably spoken far too long, so I'll hand back to you, but I hope that's given a few bits of food for thought.
Yeah, thanks, Petroc. No, you haven't spoken a little too long at all. In fact, you've raised some issues that I would like us to continue the conversation with. Just one word for our, I guess, audience is the right word for this. So if you do have questions, recognize that you need to click, because this is a different platform than you're used to participating in, you need to click on the Q&A button that, at least on my screen, appears on the upper left. So you should find it on the upper left. And if you have a question, just put it in there. One of the other things that I did, it's on the upper right, sorry. I did share with Stella and George and Petroc that one of the things that is fundamental to our learning at Fielding is that we ask really good questions. And we recognize that questions are not necessarily just about getting answers, but also about creating possibilities for movement and shared experiences and learning. So putting some responsibility on you, I think it's okay to ask some really good questions. I have one just building on what Stella and George and Petroc have mentioned so far, which is that, Petroc, you mentioned specifically the idea of listening and communication. And one of the things that design brings to the operation, say, of the World Food Program, and also something that was recognized in the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize, was the idea of what in design we refer to as need finding, which is also similar to ideas of empathy. In other words, you can go into a situation saying, I know what people need because this is what we offer, and we know that they need food. But in many places, it's a context for getting the food that's also important. And I wonder if you have some stories that you might share about this very idea of empathy and how you might have recognized what other needs accompanied just the getting of food. Stella, George, Petroc, each of you spoke to that in some way in your statements, but I wonder if any of you have other ideas. Maybe even things where you were surprised at how the local context shaped how food was being received. Actually, so one other thing about managing this session, since we don't have the usual convention of being able to see each other and looking to see who might go next. George, why don't I have you answer that or address that question first?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Yeah, it's a good question, but it's a daily occurrence, especially where Petroc and Stella are currently. Because I remember the earlier days, even before I joined the WFP, I worked for a non-governmental organization called ActionAid, and it was almost something similar once in Somalia, to go into a community and realize that, oh, I set off in the morning knowing that I'm going down to discuss with them. There's a process called PRA, Participatory Rural Appraisal, with all my notes, with all my, instruments to collect data. But when I got there, I realized that they have a customary process, a traditional process of identifying who needs what in the clan system. And so that was a bit of a surprise because in coming into that organization then, and also in joining WFP, we don't have documented, such documented, literature on how traditional customary arrangements in the community around confirming needs in the community is mapped out. So those are sort of surprises that we get every day. So, and a similar experience in Iraq, where we set off to do, we were doing some cash assistance up in a city called Erbil in Kurdistan, up in Iraq, and we get there and we realize that they have a better system than we had. So, there are these experiences every day that you realize you go there thinking only about food, but in the Kurdistan in Iraq, they're looking at a household. So they look at how does the household economy need assistance. And so they look at food, they look at health, they look at education. And this is a traditional village-based model that they run themselves, led by a village elder. So that's going back to the issue, the point that Petroc raised and your question, Fred, listening, the humility is what we have learned from all these experiences. And it still happens. It still happens. You go out there, you struggle to get answers on how to do some things, and the answers just surprise you by popping up. And lastly, also when it comes to issues around security, in a couple of places, I remember once in South Sudan, where you go, you have your own checklist of things that you're supposed to do to ensure you have a secure access to an area, who to call, the things to prepare, the roads to avoid, what kind of document to carry a little 15-kilo bag of emergency pack with medicine. But then you go walk across the street and there's this priest or a pastor who comes and says, oh, I live in this area. I have worked here for 30 years. Follow me. And so you realize that this person is actually your security. You don't need all these things and you don't need So those are the surprises you have to go through every day in this life. But of course, you also have to be prepared, just in case anything goes wrong. So in terms of identifying the needs of the people, being humble, as well as also making sure that you have safe and secure access to communities, especially in the fragile situations. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, George. Those are some wonderful stories. So it almost sounds paradoxical, right? So you need to be prepared to be not prepared, or to be prepared to be able to deal with surprises and to have some flexibility. Stella, I'm sure that you have some similar stories, well, different ones, but in a similar vein to George, about occasions where you were surprised and had to be flexible in meeting local needs.
Yes, I would like to explain. Actually, we have a practice where periodically we sit with the community and just discuss with them to find out the needs. And once you drop down to their level, they're normally free and tell us even to a detail of saying, maybe if I can give an example, in one of the operations we worked in together, they're able to say, we don't want the red sorghum, we want the white sorghum, or we don't want the white sorghum, we want the red sorghum. Something that if you use the questionnaire, you may not be able to capture that information, but beyond that food, they'll be able to tell you real needs. Now the food is there, we need water, or we need a milling facility. Those are the kind of things we're able to get as we discuss with them. Actually, in one of the pictures in your background, in the background, you'll see one of the senior staff sitting on the ground at that level with the beneficiaries, the people we serve, and you're at the same level, and they're able to explain to you. In operations where we have insecurity, they might even say, don't go that way, even after you've done your security check. So those are some of the examples I can give, but what Petroc has said is consult. It's what is going to lead us to making sustainable programming. It's what we are doing now because they have a say in what they do. That is why even when we introduce cash in areas where they're optional, there are those who are able to speak up and say, look, I qualify for cash. I know how to manage cash. It will help me better than giving me food. So the consultation helps us to direct our programming and have them as key stakeholders make a say. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example, Stella, and it also points to the idea of you need to be, with the WFP, very clear about what you can offer, but also open to recognizing that needs may be expressed differently and how you have to have the flexibility for this. Petroc, I wonder if you have some stories also, and just as a lead-in to your take on this as a communication officer, one of the things that you made very clear that I'm sure also resonates very well with our fielding community is that your idea of communication is not just getting information out, but also involves listening, and much more of a mutual idea of communication than just a one-way transmission.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I'm glad that Stella referred to that photograph. We don't need to go back to it again, but that is the country director. He's still working in Uganda, and he's Sudanese himself. As I think we pointed out, many of the refugees in Uganda are South Sudanese. So he was able to speak many of the appropriate dialects. And a couple of times I was with him, theoretically taking photographs of him on various field missions. Keeping up with that man was quite difficult because he would be jogging into the nearest village or running off base to go and talk to some of the people we were serving in their own homes or just outside their own homes, and he didn't care. Security, keep your eyes on me, and he just went for it. And that it does encapsulate, like, the WFP, of course, is a big global organization, but it also is a very local organization, and it has to be for the very reasons that George and Stella have just articulated really well. There's another slide coming along a little bit. That was a consultation that George set up, and it was for government. It was for a project organized by the local government. Some of the stuff I was talking about earlier, and so we were meeting with villagers and with farmers and the people who, you know, would stand to benefit from a project we had in mind. And, you know, of course, we could have done it all very formally in a district headquarters or a sub-county headquarters, and we would have, you know, had 3 or 4 representatives from each community, and they probably would have put on suits, and they would have come and spoken. It would have been terribly formal. But I don't think I'm verbaling George. It was George's idea that no, let's all of us go to the village and sit down with the people who will be most involved in this project, because that's the context that will allow for the easiest flow back and forth of information. And it really did. That there was some incredibly powerful and moving speeches and inputs from the communities that we were serving. Yeah, this idea of kind of just get out to the village and talk about it is, I think, is paramount to effective programming. And yes, there are contexts where security is an issue, but if we let that stop us from going and talking to and listening to the people we serve, then we wouldn't be WFP. You know, we have our security protocols, we have you know, trained staff to keep us safe and look after us, and as George says, you know, checklists and all sorts of measures are in place. But fundamentally, you know, we are a field organization for all that we're a big global organization, and that has to continue. It's one of the reasons why I am desperately, as George said at the outset, trying to make sure I get to Somalia. I'm based here in Nairobi, which is lovely and very safe, but it's a long way from the people we're actually serving. I need to go and talk to them and find out what's going on from their point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Petroc. Actually, your statement just now feeds directly into a question that came in from Rich Applebaum, who's in Santa Barbara. And many of you also will know that he's a fielding faculty member. And Rich is also on the board for the Fund for Refugee Initiatives. And his question is, to what extent and in what ways do you work directly with refugees organizations, enabling them to develop and administer projects? So since collaboration is one of your key issues or fundaments for how you organize yourselves, to what extent do you work with refugee organizations? Stella, maybe you can address that first. We'll go in a slightly different order this time.
Okay, thank you very much. The humanitarian community, not just the World Food Programme, but everybody working in the refugee context is open to working with refugee organizations. I can give an example. When George came on board in Arua, the office where we work together, looking at the capacity they have, a refugee organization was identified, capacity was built, and they started doing part of the sensitization where they had an upper hand. In some organizations, you'll find they'll not only do behavior change, they might do food distribution, managing a reception center. What I'm trying to say in summary is we are very committed as the World Food Programme and humanitarian community to work with refugee organizations. What we need to address is the capacity issues, and sometimes we've mentored them, twinned them with a bigger organization. This particular one, we were working with them with one of our partners, World Vision. UNHCR was working with different refugee organizations, so the commitment is there. And as you get skilled and are trained better, so that when they go back to their home countries, they're able to contribute and qualify. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Stella. That's wonderful to hear. George, perhaps you'd like to. I'm sure you have many at this. Yeah.
No, and it's yeah, thanks and thanks, Stella, and thanks for raising that, because yeah, that's one of the more complex kind of collaboration, because if you look at the existence of refugees is basically sort of triggered by a displacement. And that displacement is triggered by some root causes, either conflict or hunger or disaster. And at times, we also put, as WFP, as well as our partners, and not just partners, but even the business community, who at times you like to support the refugees, you really sometimes have to also study the dynamics with the groups, or if there's any tension among the refugees themselves. So, and I will mention, I think Stella will not say I'm not very diplomatic, but I think from South Sudan, you have the Dinka community, the Nues community, different clans. So you have to understand those dynamics in order to group them or to respect which group to work with. So that is the complex side. But on the nice non-complex side is that there are some of these movements, cross-border movements, happen when groups are still together. So either there used to be a youth support group working in South Sudan, and they have most of them have moved to Uganda. They congregate again. It becomes easier to work with them. So we worked with some of these groups directly, some indirectly, and some of them, because as we said, and I think in some of our profile earlier, is we support a lot of academic institutions, and some of these institutions enroll refugees into their programs. And so working with these universities, we're able to also identify some of the refugees that can help us do certain research and studies, pick out certain instruments that we need to have for further evidence collection. So there are these different ways of working with refugees, but it's very diverse. Working with the refugees from Yemen or Syria who are in Turkey is a very different occurrence, because there you have to work with this group of refugees who go to a nice supermarket and shop using either an ATM card that maybe you have supported. You don't have that in South Sudan, but you can still have some relationships in that building. But of course, Fred, it's also, there's a lot of work that will need to be done to build that capacity building process, as Stella has said. There is some happening, but I still don't think it has reached a level where there's a more sustainable capacity strengthening process that is because yeah, there is a lot of work to be done. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, George. So your comment just now reminds me of the Youth Poet Laureates at the inauguration, Amanda Gorman, and her recognizing, and this is a very systemic idea, that we are not broken, merely unfinished, and how the work that you're doing is and needs to be ongoing. It's not that you've solved the problem and can move out. Petroc, I'm sure that you also have some stories to add to this.
Yes, certainly. I guess I should just sort of remind the audience that WFP does a lot of work with refugees, but not solely with refugees. We also work a lot with internally displaced persons who, of course, have been similarly forced to move from their homes but stay within their own country, and also, people in an environment like Somalia who've never moved from home but still are struggling with food security. So there is that broader stakeholder base. I think it's also important to remember that working with refugee organizations or any organization of people we serve, you're not just thinking in terms of kind of formal organizations like national NGOs, although that is part of the landscape, but also the community structures, those sort of informal organizations amongst the populations who are assisting are incredibly important for WFP. And on the communications front, think for a second. I've been talking glibly about the importance of talking to the people we serve. Okay, Northern Uganda, 700,000 people. Literacy rates are variable, and because of the different people who've come from different places, languages vary. So to produce a poster, it needs to be, I think, in at least it was 4 languages or 5 we used to do them in. Local radio is good, but has limits to its coverage. How do you start talking to 700,000 people if you're in an office of 20 people? And a big part of the answer is going into the communities and identifying, getting to know community leaders, religious leaders, youth influencers, plugging into those structures and those kind of influence groups, and making sure that you're talking to them so that they can tell you, okay, this community is feeling like this, because they have that kind of that reach further down. And that became an increasingly large part of our work in Uganda, certainly. The refugee communities there, they all had their own organizational structures. There were refugee welfare committees made up of leaders within the refugee populations, and interacting with them was incredibly important. So there's a kind of example, I guess, of refugee organizational interaction beyond the kind of narrow definition of a refugee NGO, although those did also exist. One example of that kind of more formal structure was sort of quite delightful. We had a great program in northern Uganda called Storytellers, where WFP had taken some young refugees, kind of young men and women between, I want to say, 18 and about 30. Those who had moved from mostly South Sudan, had no job, not much to do all day, were reliant on WFP assistance basically to survive. And we were training them in sort of reporting, media, photography, social media skills. It was an amazing project in its own right, absolutely fantastic. I was delighted to work with those guys. It's sort of the highlight of any given week when I was out with them. But on one occasion, I was going to set up an interview between one of them and a Hollywood actor, which was super exciting. That was very cool. And I went a bit early because, mobile reception in the huge refugee settlements, can be a bit patchy. You want to make sure that you sort of plug into your Hollywood bigwig properly. Notice I'm not saying the name of the person, just in case I get in trouble. So I got there a bit early, and I went to find this. There were two storytellers actually I wanted to get hold of, and the leader wasn't at his house. Oh, where's he gone? And I asked around. Oh, he's over in the field doing his other thing. What other thing's that? So I follow the directions, and I find myself on the edge of this massive crowd of children between the ages of about 4 and about 16, I reckon, and they are all singing and dancing, and they've got a big PA system hooked up out in this field, in the middle of a refugee settlement. And at the centre of this sort of massive group of kids are two of our WFP storytellers. Okay, so I sort of wander over, oh, hey guys, sorry I'm early, what's going on? And one of them kind of casually goes, oh, yeah, this is ICANN South Sudan. It's like a youth counselling, youth development organisation that I set up for young people in this refugee settlement. There were 220,000 people in Bini Bini, this particular settlement, so a lot of kids. And I'm like, that is amazing. How long's that been going? And he's like, oh, I've been doing it for a couple of years. But thanks to the training I received from WFP, I've been able to promote it more broadly because, I've learned how to take the photographs, to write about what I'm doing. And we've got loads more members. And these kids were doing like skits about avoiding kind of teenage pregnancy, about how to kind of sort of work gainfully in the settlements. It was absolutely amazing. And this is something that these guys had built themselves and taken what they could learn from WFP to make it stronger, which is absolutely amazing. The next, I left Uganda shortly after that, but the next time I saw that particular guy, it was on a video call explaining to the WFP executive director, the big boss, exactly what he was doing and why, which is absolutely amazing. So I just thought I'd leave you that little story at the end there, Fred. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, Petroc. And for one thing, it speaks to the idea of the interdependency, the interconnections among issues, and how food and what the WFP does is connected to so many other things. It also leads into, we actually have a session in this alumni week on storytelling that a Fielding alum, Alberto Di Biasi, will be leading. Alberto is in Torino, Italy. And so I have to put him in touch with you. He may be on this call right now. Katrina Rogers, our president, actually had a question. If you still have the connection, Katrina?
Yes, I do. I may go off because it's a little unstable, but I really would like to ask this question. All of you have evidenced a great deal of experience, and thank you for bringing that into the conversation today. I'm curious more from a human development framework. As your work and your time in this position has matured for you, how has the work itself both changed you and sustained you? And I would just love to hear from each of you about, how you yourself have seen your own development and the way that you've changed. And I will start with George.
Hey, I was hoping to continue listening to Petroc stories. They sounded more exciting.
I agree. Great stories.
Yeah, yeah. No. I think in terms of the development, person-wise, there has been quite profound moments in my 22 years in WFP. Each time I have moved from one country to the other, I have asked my questions like, what exactly am I doing? Is this of value to me? And of course, those earlier questions are what triggered me to join the program at Fielding, because I think I had tried a lot of options to kind of do research on the work we do, and I wasn't successful. And I think, like I was telling Fred earlier, joining Fielding maybe was not just because of the session we attended in Orlando, but just the after evening beer session. I think I had a lot of good colleagues who talked about the alumni experience, and I think that was a nice informal marketing. I don't know if that's a trick of Fielding to push the conversations beyond work hours. And so for me, that has been part of the growth stages. After that, I think I learned more through the conversations and different study areas. We used to call them knowledge areas in Fielding. I don't know if you still call them that way. And the issue around humility and becoming more listening, I think is something that I picked up along that study in different occasions. But so each country offered me the experience of humility even more, and so even as I grew up my career into what I am now, the position that I always told many people that I will never want to be a country representative. And I think Petroc was laughing at me because he was one of the guys I used to say, you can never, that job is full of politics and full of, complex times, and you have to be taking care of everybody. So I think growing up into this role, I have learned to be more engaging, and like the same way we treat our community is the same way I think I treat colleagues. So to me, it means a lot in terms of giving me the opportunity also to do some work-life balance, that I need to be healthy in order to do a better job. I need to study better or do more research in order to contribute more. I need to understand more in order to communicate better. So I think personally, I have gone through these question moments of intrigue and interrogate myself. And I think as I've grown, I've become a better person. I think now as a representative of the organization, I try to see things from the other side. When I deal with government officials, for example, I go with this feeling like, one of the culture values of WFP is the integrity bit of it. So I strongly recommend and address and advocate for that from the other partners and stakeholders. And recently, I've started working a lot with the private sector partners. who are in typical business and commercial sector, and they have a very different approach to things because they just think business, they think how to make money. So how do I make sure that I bring to them the conversation that, yeah, yes, for example, Namibia is 60% dependent on food imports, as much as it is a higher middle income country. It cannot survive, and that was something that happened during COVID when the borders were closed. So how do I use these experiences to talk to the commercial sector to say, yeah, we have people who need you, and I think you participating in giving them assistance is also your long-term investment. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Katrina, just from a development point of view.
Thanks so much, George. Stella, I wonder if you have some stories to add to that? Just from your own experience? Yeah. I'm sure you do.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, yeah. Yeah, working for the World Food Program has kind of developed me to deal with different personalities, different cultures, and still be able to fit in. I had an opportunity to go and work in the Middle East, in Jordan, and every time I met somebody, I put my hand forward to greet and the men would step aside. And then I was explained to that women and men in that particular part I was in, don't shake hands, and I was able to fall in place and not take it offensive, adjust. But when I went back to the part of the globe I came from, was still able to hug. But bottom line is, that is just a simple one, but bottom line is, I've been able to learn how to work with different personalities, deal with different people, and the goal is to be able to deliver. That is what I have developed and cultivated as I work with the World Food Program and the humanitarian sphere. Also, I have learned to appreciate the little, we don't even call it little, they are big things, but we undermine them sometimes. Family, friends, having peace, having a meal, those are the simple things that in some part of the globe, you don't understand when they say there are people who don't have what to eat. There are people sleeping in bushes. A mother has gone into labor in the middle of nowhere and has to deliver a baby. So I've learned to appreciate what I have. And yeah, just know that we need to accomplish a lot if we work as a team in the office, in the world, different organizations, the academia, to be able to attain this goal of zero hunger. It's doable, but teamwork is needed from everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stella. And one of the things that you're pointing to is, so George's degree from Fielding is actually in human and organizational systems. And one of the ideas behind this is that the ways in which we as humans think of ourselves as systems that are learning and the ways that we think about organizations as learning too are intertwined. So much of what you're speaking to, Stella, really reflects the idea of how personal development and organizational development and cultural development all fit together. Petroc, I'm sure you also have some stories to add to this question from Katrina.
This is brutally unfair because I am by quite a way the baby of this particular family in a WFP sense. I just, what are we, 26th? I just marked my 2nd anniversary with the organisation a couple of days ago. So I am a fairly new inductee. And so yeah, I don't want to sort of sound overly sort of wide-eyed or naive, but I had been working or trying to work towards a shift into the UN family for 5 or 6 years before I joined. I was quite lucky, especially in Australia. I was a business journalist in the technology sector, which Australia has a tiny population given its massive size as a continent. So it was quite a niche field, and I was able quite quickly to get to know the ministers in my portfolio, sort of CEOs of the various companies. I was even fortunate to travel even to California in the Valley a few times to meet sort of some of the key people in the field over on that side, which was amazing. But it was a business paper, and I sort of became increasingly aware that as much as I enjoyed my job, as much as I enjoyed writing in the business of communications, the end result always was making quite wealthy people slightly wealthier, which on a personal level wasn't completely fulfilling. And again, at the risk of sounding sort of trite or wide-eyed, people ask, how does working for WFP compare to your expectations? It's exactly what I'd hoped for. Like, often it's difficult. Of course, there are always challenges. Zero hunger is not an easy problem to solve, otherwise we'd have solved it by now. But just knowing that you are playing a small part in helping countries and people get to a point where they don't have to worry anymore, maybe one day, about where their next meal is coming from, the personal sort of fulfillment there, I really cannot overstate. It took me a while to get used to it, because after years of always knowing what I wanted to be next, feeling like I was doing what I wanted to be doing and what made me feel like it was worthwhile was kind of a huge change. And the only other thing I'd say in terms of personal development, and I guess what's been a nice surprise, is even coming from a sort of checkered background, no matter what your experience, I think WFP can use it. There are ways it can be useful in this context. If you can write, you can talk about what we're doing. If you can sit down and interview a CEO, you can sit down and talk to a mother of 3 in a refugee village with exactly the same humility, with exactly the same patience, you can do it. If you can hold a camera the right way up, you can help WFP. Some of the slideshow photographs are stuff that I took in Uganda, although obviously the really good ones are not mine. Even the sort of weird accountancy bit of my background, which I usually try and forget, if you can look at figures and figure out what they mean in real terms, it's a skill that can be used. An organization like WFP has so many moving parts, so many complexities, so many personal interactions, and any of these skill sets are actually an asset to the organization, something that people will value and will and that you'll have a chance to build on. That, I think, has been a bit more of a surprise, and that's been really a delightful surprise in my first couple of years. Ask me again in 5 years' time, perhaps I'll sound much more cynical, although going by George and Stella, probably not.
I'll be happy to ask you in another 5 years, because one of the things we're hoping to do is to continue our conversation and relationship. And one thing that you spoke to, Petroc, that actually is a question that came in is, well, actually a few people have asked questions about what are the opportunities to contribute? How might anyone who's on this call or colleagues of theirs offer ways of either being an advocate for the World Food Program or making contributions in other forms? And I guess this is particularly important now, given how you've had to adapt to a situation which none of us anticipated with COVID and the pandemic. Stella, why don't we begin with your question? Or actually anyone who wants to say something about how might people on this call offer ways of contributing.
Well, thanks, Fred, and thanks, colleagues, and thanks for asking that question. I think if I may use Petroc's nice advocacy words, is WFP is funded voluntarily, so it survives on voluntary contributions, mostly from member countries, and so there are very many different opportunities for being part of the resource mobilization and advocacy. And as I was saying, Fred, probably we can set up another conversation to talk just about that, because there are so many different options. Of course, being selfish, I can say, just talk to me alone. I need money in Namibia. But I think I better address the problem as a global issue, as well as engage with colleagues as a group. So probably if that's okay, maybe we can do that. We'll be happy to set up a call and also prepare all options that people have. There's so many different opportunities. There's different ways of advocacy that we can sort of talk for quite some time. So I don't know if that's okay. Maybe Petroc, Stella, do you have anything to add?
I think you're spot on, George. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, I mean, George is absolutely right. I mean, on a personal level, reach out to WFP, look at volunteer opportunities. There's the UN Online Volunteers platform, which is a good way for individuals to sort of put their skill sets in touch with WFP, or actually all United Nations agencies, and look at ways to help. But yeah, advocacy is tremendously important. That voluntary funding angle means that WFP's funding is realistically extremely contingent on what's going on in national policy, particularly as it pertains to official development aid, and that is, you know, partly drawn by the prevailing political currents of the day. The COVID-19 pandemic has really had a compound effect on WFP, because on the one hand, it has driven up, it's driven up needs. It's made operations much more difficult. It's harder to get out to the field. It's harder to keep people safe when you're trying to look after them. Costs have gone up. People, you know, are more in need than ever. But on the other hand, I don't think it's too subjective to say that the pandemic has made a lot of world economies look inwards. And of course, because the impact on WFP's donor countries' own economies has been profound. I think I'm not going to argue with George about which WFP organization needs support more, but I think it's fair to say that every WFP operation across the world right now is facing severe funding crises. I mean, we feed 100 million people a year. There's something like just under 700 million people facing hunger. So already it's a fraction of the need. And at the moment, WFP is looking at a shortfall of, I think, about 3.7 billion up through April. Like, things are tight and they're getting tougher. And as I say, COVID has really had a compound effect on that. Policymakers always have to choose where their resources go. So by all means, if you want to help, start by talking to your local representatives. Say, hey, this is important to us, because those national policies across all of the donor countries that are almost WFP's entire funding base, they make a huge difference. And otherwise, as George said, I hope there's scope for further discussions.
Okay, thanks, Petroc. And I do hope that people, both become advocates for the World Food Program as well as think about ways of making contributions. We have time for just a few more questions. There are so many good questions that have come in now that I'm not going to be able to raise all of them. So those of you asking the questions, if I didn't get to yours, please don't be offended, but know that I will share them with Petroc and Stella and George afterwards. One question that did come in that connects directly with what each of you is saying is that the idea of what you're doing is also building capacity for local. So going beyond the emergency needs, but also capacity building. And I wonder if you have some ideas about how this might be shared in other circumstances. The particular one that was mentioned was one of the questioners, I don't know who sent the question in because they didn't put their name in, has a program of community building with regard to medical supplies in Senegal. And although that might seem, well, that's not the same as what the food program did, any quick lessons that you might have in terms of capacity building in general?
Fred, thanks, and thanks to the colleague who asked that question. One of the things that that we've been doing is to work with our stakeholders, and during the Ebola pandemic as well as COVID, this is where everybody tries to look for whoever can bring value on the table. And so WFP has actually been supporting not just during Ebola, but health facilities put up logistics facilities. So for example, screening centers on the border because of WFP's capacity for supply chain and logistics operation, isolation and quarantine locations for COVID when it started in some of the countries in Africa and Asia. And so these value that we bring. So even WHO, the World Health Organization, uses, let me not use the word uses, asks for some collaboration from WFP to participate in some of the health facility setup that WHO leads. One example, if I can share, I think when COVID hit across the globe, WFP was able to operate its aircraft and lease aircraft to turn its to kind of transport its humanitarian assistance workers all over the globe, as well as medical supplies, PPEs. You know, I remember I was on one of those flights. I got from Uganda to Johannesburg on my way to Namibia, but unfortunately, there was no way we could get into from Johannesburg to Namibia because I was the only one in the aircraft. And of course, the organization will think I'm not that important to be the only one flying in the aircraft. So I had to come by road. But that aircraft actually ended up carrying some medical supplies to Mozambique. So apart from Senegal, there is this level of collaboration in the health sector, medical, water. We do a lot of other stuff collaborating with other lead technical agencies. I don't know if that addresses the question.
Yeah, thanks so much. Sorry for the interruption. We actually had someone ring our doorbell here. So we only have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering, returning to the beginning, if each of you might say something about the importance of getting the Nobel Peace Prize and how that might shape the work that you're doing now, or what you see as the work for the future of the World Food Program. Stella, let's begin with you for that.
Thank you very much. Again, in that it's an honor to speak here and say, getting the Nobel Peace Prize is a big honor to the World Food Program, but it actually just emphasizes to us the importance of the need to make sure we work towards zero hunger in the world. The fact that we've got that Nobel actually means if we work collectively together, not just World Food Program, but the different units, the governments, to end or avoid war where it can be avoided, where we have natural disasters, to have preventive actions, it is possible, it's a doable task to achieve zero hunger. So with that Nobel, it has just raised the bar for us to even work harder towards getting solutions to hunger by putting the people we serve at the center of it and working towards that goal. Yes, thank you. Fred.
You're on mute, Fred.
Yeah, that's usually, I'm supposed to be the one telling people they're on mute, so I need to tell myself that. Yeah, so thanks so much, Stella. And the idea of recognizing the importance of raising the bar, and the bar will continue to go up. So this is not sort of a one-time thing. Petroc, maybe you have some thoughts on this also, particularly from the communication world, of how having the Nobel Peace Prize also shapes the framing that happens when you send messages out or receive messages.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course is a huge honor for all of us at WFP. I think it is maybe the most resounding endorsement possible of the real importance and relevance of what I'm sure everyone listening today will be familiar as the peace, development, humanitarian nexus, the triple nexus. We talk about it a lot internally. As I said at the outset, I think for a lot of people, including some of our donors, communicating the idea that WFP is now just, going beyond its traditional humanitarian mandate of delivering food to people who need it, the end. I think that is now clearer than ever. I think the interconnectedness of humanitarian response, urgent response, development for future sustainable solutions, and now peace, I think it's now clearer than ever. And my hope is that it will shape how the world looks at WFP. Hunger and peace are, or hunger and conflict actually, food security and peace are so, it's such a vicious circle. It's almost impossible to find sustainable solutions to food security without peace. Somalia is a really good example. There's I sort of see the map behind me, but there's parts of Somalia that we still can't get into, where it's incredibly challenging to deliver food because conflict is ongoing, because security is an issue. You see in the nice slides of airdrops in some areas, and aquatic vehicles and others. We don't do airdrops because they look cool. We do them because we just can't get into those areas, and conflict is a massive barrier to access. So peace is a vital foundation for food security, but equally food security builds peace, because as anyone can sort of figure out, competition for limited resources, especially food, drives conflict. If you can have not only a monthly supply of food that will stop when the funding dries up, but actually if you can start to develop food systems that will continue feeding a country, if you can start to empower governments with the training or the digital assets they need to start rolling out a social security, a social safety net to look after the most vulnerable, that will build the foundations for peace in a much more visceral way than just talking alone will do. So yeah, I think that the Nobel Prize really pushes WFP now to communicate much more clearly about that kind of tripartite linkage between peace, development, and food security. And yeah, I hope that we can help people to listen, especially again the donors who are the lifeblood of WFP.
Thanks so much, Petroc. And what you're saying builds so nicely on what Stella was saying, and also points to the importance of recognizing that hunger and peace are not separate issues, that they're intertwined, they're interbraided, and working on one also works on the other. George, as our host, we'll let you have the final word on this, since we're almost out of time.
Oh, thanks, Fred, and colleagues and everybody listening. And I think this has been a conversation that is helpful to remind us of not just the challenges ahead of us, but also the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize has given us even more momentum to work in this environment. Where I stand, or where I sit here in Namibia, Namibia is facing a critical problem of inequality. If you study the economy of Namibia, it's classified as higher middle income country, but with the 24% of stunting levels and malnutrition for a middle income country is unacceptable. But I think the spirit of the Nobel Prize has helped us to generate conversations here with the government and partners about how to ensure the government programs enhance adaptability, flexibility, interoperability, scalability of all the programs that were already designed about 10, 15 years ago to now ensure that we accelerate the journey towards zero hunger. So I'm very hopeful, I'm very excited, things are moving on well. I hope the Nobel Peace Prize will not only give us the spirit and energy to move forward, but also some of the funding and resources that we all need to make this, so that people of Namibia, for example, and other countries that are at this level do not fall down under that threshold and go back into an emergency mode. So that's the area that I think the meaning of the Nobel Peace Prize brings here to us. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks so much, George. And This brings us to the end of our 90-minute session. I want to thank Karen Bogart, again, the head of the Board of Trustees, Katrina Rogers, the president of Fielding, Hilary Molina, who has done such a magnificent job in setting this up. But mostly to thank George and Stella and Petroc for taking some time out of very busy schedules to initiate this conversation and to also set it up in a way that this conversation will go well beyond this particular session. No matter what happens now, this will always be the first session of the first alumni session. And Stella, you spoke about raising the bar for what the World Food Program is doing. And I think that your contributions, George and Stella and Petroc, have raised the bar for what a meaningful session might be like for this alumni session. So I thank all of you. And for those of you, again, whose questions I didn't get to, I will share those with our guests and look forward to continuing the conversation and